Ron Sparkman here from Stardom, and I'm here today with Dr. Shawna Pandya, and she is a physician, a martial artist, a singer, a model, a TEDx speaker, and just about everything else in the world. I think if I were to make a list of the things she doesn't do, it would probably be shorter than the things that she has done and she has accomplished. So, Shawna, we're glad to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am looking so forward to this.
Same here. We've only had a few moments to speak with each other in person, so there's a whole lot that we have not got to. So we're going to try to get to as much as possible. We have actually already started to plan a second interview because there is so much that she's involved in that I actually had to cut it in half. So we're going to have a part 2 with Shawna in the future, and by then I'm sure we'll have a dozen more things to talk about. So we'll go ahead and get started with somebody that has so much going on. It's often hard to pinpoint a polymath, somebody that does so many things. So can you share with us a bit of your personal journey to get to where you are today, and how you found an interest in such a wide range of disciplines?
Oh gosh, wow, that's a really good question. So I kind of joke to people that I live a Batman, Bruce Wayne kind of life. So by day, I'm a physician surgeon. I'm completing an extra year of residency training in what we call enhanced surgical skills. So that's basic general surgical and obstetrical skills. And then by night, as you mentioned, I do the Citizen Scientist Astronaut Candidate gig. So I'm a member of Project Opossum, which stands for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere, as well as Project Phenom, which stands for Physiology, Health and Environmental Changes in Microgravity. And then all the other things you mentioned. So I've always set goals for myself. I've always had big dreams. No one ever told me I couldn't, which was super helpful. And I also tell people that I kind of got less ambitious as I got older. So when I was 4, I wanted to be a billionaire and the next Bill Gates.
Wait, you said less ambitious? You
Yes.
got less ambitious? Okay, all right, fair enough. Continue. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so when I was 7, actually, I wanted to be a billionaire. I wanted to be the next Bill Gates and use all my wealth to solve all the world's problems. And then I realized that wasn't a thing you could go to school for. So I was like, okay, let's see what's the next thing. So then I thought astronaut. I love space. Astronaut is, space is fascinating to me. So this was, around 10 to 12 years old. And then I realized that that's not really a thing that you could go to school for. So I thought, okay, let's see what my life choices are. And I really looked up to Canadian astronaut Roberta Bondar at that point. She was the first female Canadian in space. I was a female Canadian, still am. And she was also a Girl Guide. And I thought, hey, I'm a Girl Guide. Okay, this has set my trajectory. So in order to go be an astronaut, she was a neuro-ophthalmologist. So I thought, I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. And that was my next less ambitious career goal. And then all throughout high school, I actually wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And if you look back at my high school yearbook, it's full of comments about, oh, hey, I know you're going to be a great neurosurgeon and things like that. So that really set my sights and my life goals early on. So when I got into undergrad, it was a no-brainer for me to pick neuroscience as my my undergraduate degree. I always knew I was going to med school. And then it was, around the time I applied to med school that I realized I still had a passion for space and applied to the master's program at the International Space University at the same time. Got into both, really hemmed and hawed about what I should do, and then realized that I couldn't leave the space dream behind. So deferred med school admission for a year, went off to what turned out to be the greatest year ever at real life Starfleet Academy, and that kind of set me on my current path.
So you said real life Starfleet Academy. What was the real life Starfleet Academy?
Oh my gosh, like everything you do, it's all space. It's space law, space policy, technology, engineering, life sciences. Everything you do at the International Space University is space related. It's all in teamwork. It's all in teams. It's a very hectic schedule, but it's a very fun one. Their philosophy is international, intercultural, interdisciplinary. So we had 50 students from 31 countries in my year, and your team projects could be something like design a lunar orbiter and a lunar mission, and you have 10 days to teach yourself orbital mechanics and the basics of space mission analysis and design. So it was intense, but it was a lot of fun.
That sounds pretty intense. And the interesting thing is that you've taken these two passions and you've they've kind of come to an intersection, and it's made you somebody that that's an authority that people go to. You spoke last year at the New Worlds Conference, and it's something that's really kind of intriguing that you're able to put these two together and kind of cover some topics that some people maybe wouldn't want to. I had an old roommate of mine who laughed and was like, "Why does nobody ever talk about sex and space?" And about it was no less than 3 days later, it popped up on my Facebook timeline that there was going to be an event at New Space and at New Worlds, and guess who was going to be talking about sex and space and reproduction? None other than you. So, can you tell us a little bit about that? What that talk was about, and what is it that we're looking? The challenges that we're looking at once we really are in space. I mean, it's something that people might giggle a little bit about, but it's something that's really quite serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to back up a little bit, just kind of talking about what you mentioned with the intersection of space and medicine, my time at ISC was the first time I realized that, that's a really important field and you can actually make it into your career. And from there on, I went on to intern at the Crew Medical Support Office at the European Astronaut Center with the European Space Agency and did some research for one of the new delivery vehicles to the International Space Station, and then went on to intern at NASA's Johnson Space Center. And, you just learn all these incredible things about all aspects of space medicine, space physiology, operational space medicine. And, there's always new questions arising as our missions become increasingly complex and ambitious, and new proposals for more farther locales and more long duration studies and missions come up. So to answer the second part of your question is, what is the big question when it comes to reproduction and logistics of that in space is lots. There's so much that we don't know. Basically, all we have right now are animal studies. So we look at, salamander embryos, zebrafish, rats, and see how they've developed in microgravity and what challenges there have been with that. And, as much as we have a giant diversity of species on Earth, every single one of those species has had the luxury of developing in a 1G environment. And then when you consider all the complexity that needs to occur for birth to happen, and you break it down into its individual components, from intercourse to the release of the gametes, to fertilization, to implantation, to gestation, to birth, and then the postpartum period and development. We don't have questions or answers to any of those when it comes to how the human body will react in the spaceflight environment, which is so different in terms of radiation, in terms of gravity, in terms of, being a confined space. So all we have are more questions. And what we can see from the early animal studies is that they're pretty much every single body system, whether it's the musculoskeletal system, the neurovestibular system, the optic system, they're all affected. And the question is the big question is how much or how little gravity, at what dose and at what frequency, or what time in gestation and development is needed. What is the minimum viable dose of gravity that we need to be able to carry a single life or fetus to term and do it successfully? And there's so many questions about that. And even if you answer all of those successfully, say, Elon Musk and SpaceX go to Mars, they create this Martian colony, and you successfully give birth in a 1/3 gravity environment on Mars. How is that human now going to develop on Mars? Are they going to be able to successfully return to Earth, the 1G environment? So there's so many questions. It's really fascinating. So it always breeds a lot of discussion when we, when, as you said, when we first bring it up, people, giggle a little bit and say, yeah, how do we do it in space? And, they flash back to Moonraker in the James Bond movie.
Yeah.
And then actually it ends up, fostering a lot of interesting questions, discussions, and just not just about the physiology and the logistics, but also about the ethical questions that come with that.
And I think it's sort of intriguing that we see so many things that are out there. The general public gets their ideas very rarely from scientists. They get them from movies, from TV shows, things like that. And one of them came out a few years ago, and they kind of a little bit discussed what it's going to be like if somebody were to have a child on Mars. And they had some NASA consultants for it, and it was called the space between us, and was the first child that was born on Mars. And he's extremely tall because he's in less gravity. He comes back and he gets sick, and they actually go through and they touch base on some really interesting ideas, but it's still something that we really don't understand. And I think that's something that it's major. We're going to want to, if we want to start something elsewhere, and don't get me wrong, I'm going to go to Mars. I mean, it's probably my number one goal. Well, number two, I want to go to Mars so that way I can go to Europa. But it's certainly, it's something that I think is fascinating, and I think that generally people just don't even understand that we don't understand it. And coming from somebody like you, it makes it a little bit more real that there are still so many questions that we have to answer. And another thing that you've been working on is something as well. We always see in movies, people are going crazy in space. They're losing their minds. They're either alone and they lose their minds, or they're talking to a computer and the computer goes crazy and it's sentient, or something crazy like that. So, in reality, it's one of those things that we're still trying to understand, is how people are going to deal with long duration spaceflight, how they're going to deal with spending time in the blackness of space on these long trips. There's a difference between being on the International Space Station for a year and staring at Earth, and then that long trip that anything could go wrong on your way to Mars. So these kind of psychosocial effects of long duration flight is really something else that you've been working on. So what are the advancements in that area, and what are we looking at ways to combat it and possibly, halt what could be a very scary situation of 6 people in a small area for 6 months to 3 years?
That's a great question. And as you say, psychosocial resilience, psychological resilience are such important questions when it comes to long duration space flight, and even in everyday life. Even if you're not aiming to be an astronaut in long duration space flight, looking at the components that make up psychological resilience and employing them in everyday life are really important. But the reason that we care about resilience in long duration spaceflight is exactly as you say. Manned spaceflight, particularly long duration spaceflight, is not easy. So you have to deal with altered circadian rhythms. So, if you're on the ISS, you're experiencing a sunrise every 90 minutes, which can certainly interfere with your sleep-wake cycles. You're sleeping in an altered gravity environment. You can tend to have hard workloads. You're isolated from your family and friends. Even simple things like, that we take for granted, being able to go outside and, feel and smell the grass under your feet, or even if you're in cold Canada, experience, a real winter up close. Those things aren't luxuries that are available to us in space. And so when we look at the history of psychology in space flight, we're kind of shifting. Before we were looking at select in, select out criteria, and now we're still doing that, but we're adding layers of nuance. So we're looking at select in, select out in the context of the mission design. So what is the mission duration? What's the optimal crew size? What level of heterogeneity in terms of culture, age, gender is best. There's certainly advantages to having, a mixed gender crew, but also you have to consider, going back to our earlier discussion, that if you have, there might be fraternization amongst the mixed gender crew, and if so, what do we do about that? Do we do anything about that? Do we have the right to do anything about that? And then the other aspect is that, as hard as we've made spaceflight sound, people exist and people thrive in isolated and confined environments. There are people who love wintering over in Antarctica. There are people who stay aboard nuclear submarines for months at a time, and they do fine. So the other aspect is that of positive psychology. And there's a guy out of BC, I think his name is Foodfield, that has done a lot of research around this, and it's looking at selecting in and emphasizing those aspects of spaceflight that make people rise to the occasion. That looking for individuals who will thrive an environment that challenges themselves, allows them to forge closer bonds with their teammates, really feel proud of themselves for doing something that's not easy. And then the other dimension of this is looking at providing psychosocial support to the families on the ground, both of the crew as well as mission control. So there's a lot of evolution that's happening, and it's all really positive, and it's the right direction, because if we're serious about going to Mars or the asteroids or Europa, we really need to optimize ourselves for success.
And that actually brings us to back to something that you were talking about a little bit earlier with you work with Project Possum, and you actually have a program that kind of allows us to see how we would mentally deal with a couple of different things. It's an EVA course, and you're out in the wilderness and you're stuck. It's something that's kind of terrifying. It's something that they do. They train astronauts for. If people don't know about it, quite a few astronauts speak about it. If you haven't read Scott Kelly's book, Endurance, he actually discusses it. One of the hardest things he did was being out in the middle of the Russian wilderness and basically being left alone. And here, you guys just have to survive. Build a tent, start a fire, and try not to die of smoke inhalation in your teepee. So, it's something that you've created and you worked on, and you were nice enough to torture our fellow Project Possum members last fall before we all went to Canada, which we'll talk about in a minute. So can you give us details about what you did and how that will prepare people, especially those of us in our citizen scientist astronautics program? I promise I speak professionally for a living, and and what it is that you do and what that's preparing us for.
Yeah, so the course that I run is called EVA 101, Wilderness and Space Medicine. And basically we'll look at, you're in a remote and rural environment. You have minimal medical training and medical resources at your aid, but you do have some. So how do we turn you into a medical MacGyver? And so the course is kind of two-pronged, or maybe three-pronged, I should say. So we look at, first of all, what alterations can we expect in the spaceflight environment in terms of space physiology, space medicine, and then we kind of spend a large part of our time in that course looking at principles of wilderness medicine, because how do you triage a patient? So if you have zero medical background and you come across someone who is obviously injured, or you yourself, have suffered a broken femur or a broken bone in the middle of nowhere, and all you have is, a set of clothes and, a long piece of, wood if you're in the woods, or a long piece of metal pole if you're in space. How do you function or fashion a splint for yourself? And then the other aspect is the resilience and psychosocial interaction aspect of it. How do you work effectively as a team? How does your communication change in a time of crisis? How should it change? What are the different models of teamwork and leadership? And what are optimal ways to act in a crisis? So we had a lot of fun. So the course structure presently is 4 online webinars and then a 4-day course in Colorado, where we actually do a lot of hands-on stuff. We spend a lot of time teaching our participants the principles of triage, or wilderness triage, and then we just throw them into scenarios, everything from easy, straightforward scenarios to mass casualty scenarios to severe life-threatening injuries, simulated spacecraft crashes. There's a lot. We throw, and we tailor it to the participants' evolution in the course, and they all did so well. We threw a lot of on-the-spot decision making. A lot of them were, really got into the simulations. You could see they were stressed, hands shaking, but their brains were going. There was a lot of teamwork. We did a night scenario. And oh my gosh, how much they evolved from that was incredible. And so our hope is that they have these principles of medical triage and basic first aid, and can use that in a resource-limited environment, whether it's the wilderness or whether it's spaceflight environment, to actively support an injured crewmate or teammate, and then make the decision of, can we treat this or do we need to evacuate? And what was really cool is that one of our participants, maybe within the week, he actually sent me an email saying that he had actually passed a rollover, a vehicle rollover along the highway, and he was able to apply what he learned, protect the C-spine, call for help, apply principles of basic first aid, and that was really gratifying that he was able to actually translate his skills into real life. Even if it wasn't a downed spacecraft, he was able to at least protect a spine and keep that patient safe and comfortable until the authorities came.
And I think that I can only imagine what that would feel like. And I think that's something that most people don't realize, that when you take up the idea that you want to go to space and you want to do these things, is that a great variety of skill sets comes with this. If you've never been involved in a course or anything to do with Project Possum, or if you've never read any of the stories that come from the astronauts that have been through so much, it's training on everything, especially the Russians. The Russians, yes, you're going to learn everything from the ground up. You're going to learn where the wood came from. That what kind of tree is this? You're going to have to know all of that. All right, so it's been around this many billions of years. So it's something that's very intensive for so many people. And Project Possum has really grown quite a bit over the years as it adds people like yourself to the team. But you're not just a teacher; you're also you're a student, and you also are there to help with a lot of the big events that they have going on. And one of them was last year was the Micro-G flight, where we tested a spacesuit, first time visor down, for a commercial spacesuit, which was really, really big. So could you tell us a little bit about the importance of that mission for the suit testing?
Yeah, I always love working with Project Possum and partnering with Final Frontier Design to do the microgravity flight. So that was my third campaign with them. I did one in October 2015, one in 2016. And basically, for those who aren't familiar with parabolic flight, we fly, where a commercial airliner would fly, and actually lower in the case of the studies we were doing, at about 17,000 feet. And we follow a curve that's a parabola, hence the name, accelerating at 2 Gs and then leveling out, giving us 30 seconds of weightlessness, and then coming back to our flight trajectory at 2 Gs. And the reason we do these is because we want to advance our technology readiness level for space. So the ultimate goal of Final Frontier Design with their IVA, or intravehicular activity suits, is to say that they're space ready. And so we do this to simulate a spaceflight environment, and that prove that the suit does what we need it to do. So in this case, before we did the visor down testing, we needed to see, can we move in the suit? Can we do big movements, and can we do little movements when it comes to flicking switches and to pushing buttons to do the science we need, and in the case of the pilot, to be able to navigate the craft. So this year was really cool, not just because of the team involved, which was always a lot of fun, but because we got to go visor down. That was a shout out to you. So we got to go visor down and see how we tolerated the suit down, or the visor down, to see if it got too hot, to see if we were adequately ventilated, to see how we could move. And it's always really interesting being a test subject, because you need to be hyper aware and of what's going on and what feedback you can provide to both the suit designers as well as the crews who come after you to make sure they have a successful test flight. So it was a ton of fun. Really enjoyed doing it.
And that was actually going to be that's kind of the follow up. So for you personally, you were grinning the whole time you were in the suit before you were, whatever we were doing all the pre-flight stuff and checking to make sure everybody was okay before we did the flights. So what was it like for you personally to be in Micro-G in a spacesuit testing something as somebody that wants to go to space? And actually, it's something that you have to deal with a lot as well, is that people already think that you've gone to space. Yeah, I know that's been kind of an issue with you. Something that we laughed about during that. But what was it like for you personally to be in the suit in Micro-G?
Oh gosh, it's always amazing. I think I told you at the time, like, it's impossible to be in a spacesuit and not have a smile on your face. And that's for a variety of reasons. The obvious one is being in microgravity is fun. But the other parts of it are that you're working with a team that has proven itself. The people that you work with are incredible, and they come from all manner of backgrounds. They come from the sciences, engineering. We have medical doctors. We have pilots, and they're all, they're all just so humble. They're all so mission focused, and it's like a reunion. It's a joy to come back to each awesome mission. So that's really fun. And
Except
then
for me, they kept me in a corner. Just go be quiet, Ron. You're lucky you're even here.
not at all. It was a blast, hanging out with you in Ottawa. That was really awesome. And I hope it's not too long before we hang out again, for sure. And then just knowing that you're helping Final Frontier and you're helping space science and exploration in general, for their knowledge and their mission, it's really gratifying feeling. And then, yeah, it is funny. You're right. People often do think I've gone to space or I'm heading to Mars due to an odd series of events about a year ago. But
and not just you, another part of the team. It was, you guys actually had to get together. The two of you had to get together and like, we're going to do a YouTube video. We're going to do a quick Facebook video together so we can talk about this and say that, no, neither one of us, one, we don't have any animosity towards each other. And two, neither one of us has done this yet. Please stop saying this.
You know what? It backfired because, so maybe I should give some background. So I was in India visiting some family in February 2017. And one of my uncle's friends had come to his shop and, was looking through the articles that my uncle, he was really proud of all the work that I've done, had compiled. And, he was going through them with me. And I was saying, oh, yeah, this is what I do with Project Possum. It's always been really fun. And we went through the articles, I explained what I do. So I thought it was pretty clear. And then he gave me his card as he left. And I thought, oh, okay, HT Media, I guess that's, I'll look up for the publication. And then I asked my mom afterwards, I'm like, oh, what's HT Media? Oh, she's like, that's the Hindustan Times, like one of the biggest newspapers in India. I was like, oh, okay, well, it'll be cool for them to cover what we do with Possum. And we'd gone for our morning workouts the next day, and we stopped by the train station on the way back. And I was like, oh, I wonder if they decided to run the story. And so I picked up the paper, but I was like, oh, they probably buried it in the back somewhere. Then I was looking through the black and white pages at the back, not thinking to look anywhere else. I was like, okay, this is not to read it. Then I go back, and then our next door neighbor comes in, and she brings in multiple copies of the paper, and they're in full color on the front page, right under the picture of Barack Obama kite surfing with Richard Branson.
What a thing to be featured with.
Yeah, like third Indian origin astronaut selected for NASA mission in 2018. And then from there, it just spiraled out of control. I think there were some reports that I was going to Mars. And it was just this media frenzy. And then, by the time it took longer than it should have for me to clue in that we're speaking English, but speaking two different languages. So the first 24 hours of that media cycle was me doing interviews, and then the next 24 hours was me clarifying. And I thought the best thing to do was just clarify on social media. And then, I kind of said my piece and didn't want it to continue beyond that in the news cycle. But it's so funny because to this day, I still, get bad mail from around the world. People, telling me that they want to follow in my footsteps as the next Indian origin astronaut. And then the other part of that is our mutual friend and teammate Anima Patel Saval. She gets the same thing, and she, people, because of her mission, her experience in analog environments, she did the Hera mission. She's done it. People have, again, spiraled out of control, saying, "Hey, she's gone to Mars. What was it like on Mars?" And she's like, "That's not what happened."
That's not at all what's going on. Yeah.
And then I've been lucky. I've never had to deal with animosity directed towards any of my teammates because they're all fantastic. But she's had questions, saying, "So was there competition amongst you two?" And honestly, she was my roommate in Ottawa. We're really good friends.
Oh yeah. It's for me to hear it, not knowing that this was a thing prior to that, and just the way you guys were around each other, you're like sisters. And it's weird when both of you showed me that people are trying. It does show, and if anybody hates the term fake news, it's me. But there is a fact that the media can sometimes tell a piece of the story or see it through their own lens. I'll put it that way. And there are certainly people that just misappropriate information, period. But it's to even think that, especially with the way you guys goof off and like in the inside jokes and just everything that goes on, to hear the other side of it, it was humorous. It really was. And it's so funny, in fact, that a professional stand-up comedian even put you in his act talking about the fact that somebody had screwed up and decided to say this. And he even, and to his credit, he gives you the credit saying, no, that's not what I said. And I love the fact that he was willing to do that. This is really funny. This is what the paper said. This was not true. And she actually came forward and said this wasn't true. But I love the fact that it even made its way into a stand-up comedy act. That makes it so much better.
That was hilarious because he just took it to a whole new level. And he's like, well, then it turned out that she was an astronaut. Then it turned out she's going to Mars. And then she said, I am Mars. And then it was just like,
I am Mars. I am Mars. That was really that was great. And the guy nailed it. It really was. I laugh about it every time I think about it. So, and so you've got a whole lot of these things going on, but you with everything that happens, you have actually taken the publicity and the media attention that you've got, and you've rolled it over into a couple of really cool things. You've done some TEDx talks. Can you tell us a little bit about the TEDx talks you have and how you came about saying, okay, this is the topic I want to cover when you are good at 4,000 different things?
Yeah, it's always kind of a surprise, I think, to people what I talk about in my TEDx talk. So the first one was in 2010 when I had my Silicon Valley startup. We looked at, this was at Singularity University, which is a sister institution to the International Space University, and they challenged their attendees to answer the question, how can we positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years using accelerating technology? And smartphones and location-aware capabilities were brand new at that time in 2009. So with our team, I was a co-founder of what we called CiviGuard. We asked, what if a smartphone could save your life in a crisis? And we devised this new method of disaster response communication that could say, okay, we see your, this is what's happening. We see this is where you are. Here is here is the most useful information to you now. So that's how, so that was the backstory to it. So in terms of, there was a lot of, being in Silicon Valley at the time, there was, it's like Disneyland for innovators.
I've heard.
It's such a fun place to be. Like every single day, you walk in and something mind-blowing is happening. So I remember I walked into my office at NASA Ames once, and then I think I heard something coming from the closet making noises, and it was this telepresence robot like coming to life because they were trying to connect to someone else on the faculty. Or another time, I was living in this wonderful, beautiful communal house called Rainbow Mansion, and the only rule to live there is you have to be driven and working on big ideas. And so we had some really interesting awesome housemates, and I came back from a space conference in Korea.
Back that up. You have to do what?
So I lived in a place called Rainbow Mansion. And I came back from so the rule to live there is that you have to be working on big things and really driven to be working on big problems and big ideas. So my housemates, worked at Stanford Labs, worked at Google, worked at NASA. And there was never a dull moment. And I remember this one time I came back from this space conference in Korea, and they had found a supercomputer server in the garage, because I guess that's just what people have in their garages. And they had dusted it off, and they reprogrammed it to mix and dispense drinks, because apparently that's what you do with recycled servers. So it was a really cool place. And so that's the backstory. So that kind of fueled my first TED Talk, and it's what I thought about innovation was wrong, and it kind of went over, how when you have more constraints, when you work with people, when you have different disciplines working together, those are really good ingredients for fostering innovation. So that was 2010. And then in 2016, I was asked to speak to TEDx Alberta. And it was a really interesting time in my life, because in a previous life, I trained as a neurosurgeon. And I was leaving that program. And as we talked about, that was definitely a lifelong dream of mine. So it was a really hard decision. And when you're not doing what you set out to do, you definitely don't feel like you're at your best. And at the time, I was feeling like I was at rock bottom, and it was so interesting. It was this juxtaposition, because I still, this was before I really got into, or just as I was getting into Project Possum, and some of it was before, but I would still be, meeting people on the street, and they would be saying, "We think you're inspiring. We love what you do," and it would be just a weird juxtaposition, internally feeling like you're at rock bottom, but wanting to succeed, wanting to, rebuild your life to the level of functioning and the pace you're used to working at, and this external view that people have of you. And actually, that's how I got into my research on resilience and psychological resilience. And for those who don't want to watch the 20-minute TED Talk, the spoiler, like the takeaways are that resilience isn't innate. It's something that can be learned. And, it's equally important when we're doing really well and want to keep up our pace of success and the momentum, or when we've hit rock bottom and need to bounce back. And the 5 key components are having adequate social support, controlling our impulses, mental rehearsal, breaking things down, and, planning for the best and worst.
And so it kind of shares a little bit of the passion you have to educate people and let them know more about what they can be and who they can be. And you have co-founded an organization that wants to help 1 billion people. That's 1 billion people, and it sounds very much like, to go back to where we began, it sounds very much like you're trying to do the Bill Gates thing. So what's the idea for the helping billion people, and where can people find out information about it?
Yeah, so that was CiviGuard. That was when we were at Singularity University. And again, it was like this very conducive environment to just brainstorming and innovating, and you're paired with these incredibly bright people. So we were the first class that went through. We were 40 students from 17 countries. And then we split off into different teams to work on different projects. And so the initial founding team was 9 people from 7 countries. And then when the program ended, it was 9 weeks. We opted to keep forward with it. So 3 of us went forward as co-founders. And then, we started building up the technology around CiviGuard. We started going to conferences, talking, to relevant emergency response authorities, even, getting meetings, high-level meetings at the White House and with the UN Emergency Telecommunications Group. And so, it was really gratifying to be able to do that. We got coverage from BBC and Entrepreneur Magazine and Inc. And so I left the company when I went back to medical school, to residency, and it's now we kind of, the technology's caught up. So what we did at the time was very novel. Everything from the location-aware aspect to social media communications. We would even have buttons that would immediately connect to Twitter and Facebook saying, "I'm okay," and location tag you. And these days, it's, that's not novel. It's a very common thing. When there's an earthquake or a mass shooting, you'll see on your Facebook feed, so-and-so has marked themselves safe. But that was we were kind of one of the first ones to the table on that. So
there was an idea out there before Facebook, and now Facebook does it? You're kidding me.
Yeah, so they might have evolved it in parallel. I think there's other companies out there who do that, but to see that even if we weren't the ones who became the the billion lives saving ones, the fact that there's services out there that do that aim to keep people safer in a more specific way in time of a crisis, like that's pretty cool.
And we really went over so many things, and we barely, it's crazy to say that we barely scratched the surface because of all the things that you're into. And we will discuss much more the next time that we speak with you. But to kind of wrap it up, is there anything that you would like to say, any advice that you would like to give for the countless people out there that you have already connected with, and that, that are inspired by the story that you have and what you do and how you have kept going through all the challenges and stuff that you have faced? What's some advice for them, and how could they follow in your footsteps?
Oh gosh, you know what? Set goals.
No pressure.
Set goals for yourself is what I would say. Set, long-term, medium-term, short-term, and immediate-term goals for yourself. Make plans to get those things done. Don't get too hard on yourself if you're not getting them done. Just, step back, regroup, and charge again. And make sure you have good people in your life to help you through this, because the reason that I can do so much is because I'm surrounded by amazing people who are very supportive, who are very helpful. So that would be my parting advice. Aim high. Don't restrict yourself from the get-go, and have good people along the way.
And also follow Shawna on all of her social media because she's very inspirational. Where can people find you on social media?
At Shawna Pandya. So that's across on Twitter and Instagram. So SHAWNAPANDYA. And then on Facebook, I have a public page, Dr. Shawna Pandya. So if you want to head over there, give that a like and follow along with my adventures. We'll see you out there.
And thank you so much, Shawna, for coming on the show today. We appreciate it, and all the very cool things that you're into. We certainly look forward to the next time that we get to catch up with you. I'm sure there will be another dozen or so things that you have accomplished that we will all be excited to hear about. So thank you so much for coming on today, Shawna, and we really appreciate you sharing it with us, and we can't wait for the next time to talk to you because there's still so much more. We haven't even talked about the martial arts and the modeling and all the super cool things that you do. So we'll certainly talk about that when we catch up with you next.
Great. Thank you so much for having me today, Ron. I am so excited to come back next time and talk about, everything, really.
Fantastic. And to everybody listening out there, thank you. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys on the next episode.